Hailsome, my brothers and sisters. Recently, I was asked a question by several people, and the question was, what is our position when it comes to rituals, like performing the bloats, the different types of ritual items that are used? And it seemed like there was a confusion because most of the people that I have met, when they come into Odinism or Wotanism, they learn about the gods, they learn about the goddesses, they learn the runes, they learn some lores, they learn some myths. But the problem arises when it comes time for them to want to worship the gods and goddesses. And how do they go about doing it? And I know when I first got introduced to Odinism, I was introduced to Odinism in prison. And I was taught everything I needed to know. But most of the stuff that I learned on my own. And there came a point within my growth and the development that I wanted to do more. My Aryan soul was calling for me to want to really worship my gods and my goddesses. And I seen so many different ways that people were doing bloats. Some would do a bloat without the symbol. Some would do both. Some would put up shield walls before the bloat. Some wouldn't. And it somewhat got confusing for me. So what I did is I found a book in the chapel library, and it was by Asatru Free Assembly. It was a book on bloats, and within it they had an outline of how you can do bloats to Wotan, bloats to Thor, Balder, Freya, Frey. And so I started to do these bloats. On Monday, I would do a particular bloat to a god. On Tuesday, I would do the Tyr bloat. On Wednesday, the Wotan's bloat. Thursday, the Thor's bloat. Friday, Frigga bloat. And it got to a point where it just became repetition. I just kept doing the same thing over and over and over. And eventually, the bloat somewhat lost its meaning to me. And I started wanting even more. And I see that from talking to certain people that this is also an issue they have, especially for practitioners who are really practicing on their own and they don't belong to a kindred, or even if they don't belong to a kindred, they don't go to other kindreds where people are participating in bloats and stuff like that. And hopefully this video will maybe clarify some things. I know that there will be a lot more information than what I personally know. So I will only try to give an understanding of where we get these bloats from, how that we come about them. One of the things that first has to be understood is that Odinism or Wotanism, it's different than other religions. And I use the word religion now just to keep it on a simple level where it can be understood what I'm talking about. But Wotanism and Odinism is different from other religions. And the reason why it's different is, if we take Judaism, everything is written for them. They don't even need to think. It's written. All they have to do is open their book. There it is. Christianity, same thing. All they have to do is open their book up. It's mapped out for them. Everything they need to know, it's already there. There's really no thinking involved for them at all. Islam, definitely the same thing. Everything's written for them. Everything that they have to do from the time they embraced Islam till the time they die, it's already there. They don't have to think. They don't have to add nothing to it. Wotanism and Odinism is totally different than that. And the reason for that is that our gods and our goddesses and our ancestors didn't hand us a ritual book, so to speak. They didn't hand us things and tell us this has to be done. This has to be done this way. And from my viewpoint, based upon my studying, I see a lot of wisdom in that not being done. Because our worshiping of our gods and goddesses, it's on a personal nature, so to speak, because we worship our gods and our goddesses in a way that is right for the individual. It's right for us. And there's some brothers and some sisters who will do practices that fit them. It's what their heart tells them to do. And so there is no set format. We have no holy book. We have no book that is written in stone of this is how, this is the way something has to be done. And for a lot of us, as we begin to grow within Odinism and Wotanism, and we begin to really sincerely want to connect to our gods and our goddesses, we search for the means in which to achieve that. And when we look at Odinism and Wotanism, we understand that there were individuals who introduced this way of life to us in America. And they established kindreds. And their kindreds formulated their bloats, the way they're going to do it. A lot of us, we came in and learned through the Asa True way. Not all of us, but a vast majority of us did. We learned through Asa True. And this was primarily through the Stephen McNallen books. And we would do those bloats. And then as we began to grow, many of us began to adapt the Odinic rite. And we began to do the bloats according to the way that they had established it. And for a lot of us who embraced Wotanism, we began to do the bloats according to Ron McVan's book called The Temple of Wotan. And the reason for that is because the majority of us had already experienced our Aryan awakening. And his book, The Temple of Wotan, really connected to the way that we thought. And the way that Ron McVan laid out the bloats and laid out the symbols, it really summed up a lot of what we wanted to do. We just didn't know how to do it. So there's variations in the way that the bloats and the symbols and stuff are done. But over time, there has become things that has been established. Such as formulating a circle. For me, I had nobody to teach me how to do that. So I learned from a book called The Futhark. And in it, it stated and showed how to build a circle. Some kindreds will just draw a circle. Some kindreds will put 24 stones around as their circle. They will put the 24 runes around it. Some kindreds, they will put up what's known as a shield wall. This is where we will do the hammer hollowing, going in all four corner directions, and raise a hammer up, and we will somewhat, I guess you could say, sanctify or purify the circle. Some will do 8, based on what kindred it is that you go to, based on what book it is that you read. Some kindreds you will see, they will consecrate the altar, and some won't. Um, some kindreds will do a 3-round sumbel after. The first round to a god, the second round to an ancestors, and the third round to um, a person of your choice, somebody living. But here's the thing that has to be remembered. None of these are set in stone. None of these are obligatory for us to do. But what happens is that different kindreds will take different methods in which they'll use. And sometimes this can be real confusing, because I had a sister tell me that she went to a bloat and they did the bloat totally different than the way that her kindred did it, and she felt uncomfortable. And this can impose a serious problem within a person's growth and their development, because no kindred does it right in the sense of that is the only way that it can be done. One of the things that we will learn as we grow is that our gods and goddesses are worshipped in different ways. Different people connect differently. We will have some that will not participate in kindred bloats. They wish to just do their bloats on their own, or their symbols, do them on their own. And somewhat even this is slightly poses a problem to a person's growth and development, because Odinism and Wotanism is collectiveness. Yes, there is things that we do that we can do on our own, but we must remember that our way of life revolves around and centers around multiple people. When we come together and do the symbols, it's not that we're just necessarily coming together to raise a horn to our gods or our goddesses or our ancestors. It's a coming together of the Aryan soul to connect and to become one. This builds our relationship with each other. It connects us. For that one moment in time, it connects us. And it builds that bond, because the symbols and the bloats, when we really look at it, it's really geared towards us coming together and learning. Because the Gothi, or the leader of that time, will either write out a bloat or he will read a bloat from a book. Whichever way it's done is perfectly okay. A person can even memorize the bloat and not read it, none of that, and it's still perfectly okay, because there is no set stone for us. Now, you might go to a kindred, and that kindred has a set way in which they do their bloats. I have personally never went to one of those, and I've never participated in one. But I have heard that those kindreds do exist. They only allow you to do the bloat according to the way they have written out. And that might be what a person's into. A person might want that kind of structure. But most kindreds, whoever's doing the bloat, will either read from a book but put their own take to it. And then we have to remember that there is, even though there's no dogma in this way of life, there is certain things that have been established and they have become established practices. And most kindreds will abide by those. And those guidelines pretty much stay the same, which would be the hallowing or the hammering of the circle, purifying the circle, having an altar, having certain ritual items such as the horn, the boli, the sprig to do the blessings, if kindreds do that. The hammer. They might even have the gonder for blessing. They might even have a sword. These are all items. And where we get these items of use is that when we study the Havamal or the Poetic Edda, we begin to learn that certain gods had certain items that they would carry on them. Such as, we know that the horn is significant to Wotan. We know that the Gonder is also significant to Wotan. We know that the hammer is Thor's ritual item. We know that the hammer was used for hallowing. When we read that in the Havamals or the Poetic Eddas, we read where the hammer was used to hallow food. It was used to hallow land. It was used to hallow weddings. So we have adapted that. Based upon that, we know that the antlers are significant to Frey. We know that the keys are significant to Frigga. So you will see certain types of ritual items based upon whatever kindred you go to. So we shouldn't get frustrated with it. We must just understand that the knowledge that our ancestors handed us and the knowledge that our gods and goddesses handed us in the aspects of worshiping are so vast that you could probably go to 20 different kindreds and all 20 different kindreds are doing something different. So we shouldn't get discouraged with that. We shouldn't get confused, because there is some good books out there that brothers or sisters took the time out, wrote them, gave a brief layout. But the one thing that has to be remembered is that our way of life is progressive. It's never stagnant. So I would recommend, and this is just my recommendation, that if you find a book that deals with the bloats and the summals, and I would make sure that these aren't books that were put out by the Wicked True. There is some books out there that's put out by universal theosophists who are trying to interpret the bloats and do some weird stuff with them. You have some books out there that are done by universalists, and they add some stuff into it to where they want to mix the Egyptian mythology and all this other stuff within these bloats. And this is where the problems come in at, because when you start introducing foreign stuff into the established practice, this is when elements start creeping in, and pretty soon the people are so far away from what true Odinism is and what true Wotanisms are that sometimes it's hard to bring them back. So I would ask or recommend that you reach out to some brothers or some sisters who you know is on the Odinist path, who you know are that are on the Wotanist path, and ask for some books. Ask them to give you some recommendations on some real good books that really break down the bloats and what each thing represents. Because in order for the bloat to really have an effect, you need to have an understanding of why it is that you're doing it. And then this way, when you go to another kindred that is doing a bloat differently than what you're used to, you don't develop this wall. You won't develop this concept that they're wrong. because it's not being done your way. And there's plenty of brothers and sisters out there, myself included, that would be more than happy to make sure you got the proper books. But then I would take it one step further. Once you start developing an idea or an understanding of what the bloat is, start adding your own. Because remember, when you read somebody else's bloats, you're reading somebody else's thoughts. They're not yours. It's only a guide in order to put you on the right path. And at some point in time, you'll want to develop your own bloat, start doing your own symbols when you raise a horn. Rather than repeating what somebody else wrote, you would be able to say what it is in your heart and that's on your mind. Then you begin to have this personal connection with the gods and goddesses. They no longer become an entity that you just have a connection with through somebody else's words. And this is where a lot of this comes from. When people grow and they develop within Odinism or Wotanism, they begin to be more relaxed, so to speak, not so rigid. And they begin to experiment with their own words. And then pretty soon they have developed their own bloat, their own words. Now the bloats, they become more meaningful. So I hope that I clarified this a little bit. And I'm pretty sure that there's brothers and sisters out there who have way more knowledge on this subject than I do. I was only trying to attempt to maybe put some enlightenment on this subject, because there is so much information out there, and it can become real confusing when you try to figure everything out. So I would suggest line yourself up with a kindred. Get involved with a kindred, because not only can they guide you in the correct etiquette of doing a bloat and the correct etiquette of doing a symbol, but you begin to learn. And for some people, it's kind of hard to speak in front of people, so they don't really get involved. But by you going to a kindred and being around these people all the time, over and over and over, you begin to become comfortable, and you begin to learn to speak in front of people. And if you're not good at speaking, then write out what it is you want to say. Because any kindred that I've ever been in, no brother or sister will look down upon a person for that. Because the thing that has to be remembered is a lot of us have been in this for years. So we've developed certain prayers that we would make. We developed a ritual. So we don't have to write it out. But just because you have to write it out and another brother doesn't, it doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. All it means is that each one is doing what is comfortable for them to do. And this is why in most kindreds, I know in my kindred, in my tribe, Gallows Tree, one of the requirements of a seeker is that he has to do several bloats. He has to perform a couple bloats. And here's the wisdom behind that, is that when you bring a new person in, you understand that they have all these confusing thoughts. So by getting them to study for a bloat, you are teaching them to be able to worship their gods and goddesses, but you're also teaching them how to teach other people later down the road. So get involved in a kindred. Get a hold of some good books that will guide you in the right direction. And then, if the gods are willing, at some point in time, you will be able to formulate your own bloat. You'll be able to do your own rituals. And when it comes to personal rituals, if you want to set up an altar, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. When we study the myths and read the Poetic Edda, we find that there were certain, invocations, prayers, whichever one you want to use, that were used. Like the hailing of the Suna or the hailing of the sun. We know that that's there. The raising of the horn and saying hail and sending blessings and boasting, we also know that was there. We also know, based upon the Viking history and the history even before them, that this was what was done. So, and one thing I wanted to clarify was that a brother told me that he felt offended because he went to a bloat and the brothers raised a horn and they were boasting about the things they were going to do. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's exactly what the raising of the horn is. Is when we raise the horn, we boast about what we're going to do. But the thing about that is when we boast about what we're going to do out loud, brothers and sisters can hold you accountable for that because your boast becomes an oath. So I would ask that brothers be kind of careful when you do that. Because if you really don't mean it, don't put it out there. Because once you put it out, other brothers hear it, other sisters hear it, and they will hold you accountable for that. You will be held accountable for what you boasted about. So, with that said, I hope I clarified it and not made it confusing, even more confusing. Again, there's a lot of information out there. Please make sure you get the right information. If you're unsure about what books to get, contact a brother that you trust, that you know that's on the right path. And I'm pretty sure that brother or that sister would be more than happy to direct you in the right direction, send you the information either through the mail or through online. Helsa, and may the gods and goddesses continue to lead and guide us to become closer to them. And may all those who stand upon the 14, may the gods and goddesses continue to bless us and bless our families. Helsa.